as we've kind of walked through these different ideas, we've walked through these different devotions, and these different just kind of concepts, these ideas of being a Christian, of what it means to welcome people to your table, of what it means to be part of a fellowship, to be part of a faith community. We've walked through different ideas, and today I just want to kind of hit on another one, this idea of your identity, of who you are, and why it is that Christians, as Christians, we claim this identity as a child of God. And so I want to talk more about what it means to claim that identity than necessarily why we claim that identity. But I think Paul does a great job in the book of Romans explaining kind of what this means for us in claiming that identity. And so if you want to open your Bibles with me, if you want to read along, I'm going to be reading from Romans chapter 8, verses 16, 17, and 18. And just kind of see what comes along with claiming that child of God identity. And so starting in verse 16, he's leading up to this. He begins talking about if we follow Christ, if we're spirit-led, then we belong to the family of God. We are a son or daughter of God. And so building on that idea, he kind of begins explaining what it means to claim that. So starting in verse 16, it says, "The Spirit himself testifies together with our own spirit, assuring us that we are children of God. And if we are his children, then we are his heirs also, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, sharing his inheritance with him. Only we must share his suffering if we are to share his glory." And then verse 18 says, "But what of that? For I consider that the sufferings of this present time, this present life, are not worth being compared to the glory that is about to be revealed to us, and in us, and for us, and conferred on us." And so we have this idea that Paul kind of builds out right here of if you are a child of God, so if you are spirit-led, as he phrases it, if you're spirit-led, then God has a plan for you. He has an heir or an inheritance for you. Like you as an heir to the kingdom, we are heirs with Christ. So we get to walk into that kingdom at the end of time. We get to walk in and be a part of that glorious day where we get to live in physical proximity to God, where we get to see and converse with him and be a part of his mission fully and completely in that moment. And so walking into that, we kind of see that there's this glorious day coming. And so then what does that mean for us here? Well, Paul is very quick to point out in verse 17 that while we receive all of this inheritance, while we receive this glory that's coming, we also have to share in the suffering that Christ did. We have to be a part of that suffering. And so often when we talk about identity, we look at kind of two different types of identity. So if you're looking at the outward identity, right, what people around say about you, what your family, your friends, how they see you, how they identify you, how they address you, oftentimes becomes such a big part of that personal identity in a person's life. And so if you have a family that cuts you down, that doesn't want to hear you out, that just dismisses you offhand, then a lot of times you'll begin to kind of identify as something that isn't worth being listened to, that isn't worth people's time. And so we have this outward identity that we kind of lean on, but we also have this inward identity. You think about it like the things you want to be, right? You want to be a better public speaker. You want to be more courageous, and maybe you just want to be more fearless, right? You want to be someone who can stand up and say something when it needs to be said, or address a situation when it needs to be addressed. And so if we look at those kind of ideas of identity, of where your identity comes from, when we start losing sight of what it is God tells us our identity is, as children of God, as heirs into the kingdom, then it's easy for those other voices to come in and replace that identity. And our identity begins to become what other people around us tell us we are, what we should be. And in turn, our challenge for this week is to kind of turn back inward and look at that identity of Christ. So today I just want to leave you with the challenge from verse 18. As we read, he talks about the sufferings that are in this lifetime, that are happening now, that we have to go through in the next few years. These sufferings that are going to come up, they're nothing compared to the glory that's coming. And so when we have that identity that God gives us, when we are sons and daughters of God, when we are heirs with Christ, even the hardest times are nothing because we know what's coming in the glory. So I want to challenge you to cling on to that identity, not this identity that you've got in the public square, that you've got in your community, in your church, in your family. in your friend group, but instead cling to that identity that God gives us as sons and daughters, as heirs with Christ. And understand that when we cling to that identity, the sufferings that come, they pale in comparison to the glory that's going to come after. Thank you.